Thank you very much, Beata. I'm Sue Sullivan from New Zealand, and I don't know what time it is in Egypt and Alexandria. I can guess what time it is in Hungary, though. It's evening on Saturday night here in New Zealand. So I want to start, however, with an ask for your patience in listening for a few minutes about a myth that exists in our field of teaching language as a second language. And that myth is about writing, that we somehow have fallen into the train track in the last 100-odd years of using the written word for teaching pronunciation, or we use it as a backup or in some way. So I'm going to quickly read some notes to you because I want to get through this quickly. I would love to hear from you afterwards. I think there are issues in our field of second language learning and teaching, and we all need to, be doing research and doing the best we can. So the myth that we can actually teach pronunciation using the written word really must be broken. We talk about, and I'm going to give examples, we talk about language, for instance, that is fast or slow, as if there were somewhere a perfect speed or a kind of perfect language against which we're measuring fluent speech. And I suspect that half the time, in the back of our minds, we are comparing that to the written word. We're evaluating or describing speech against the false criteria of written language. As many teachers and practitioners have already pointed out long ago, writing with its little white gaps between the words is nothing like the language that is physical, that exists in our body, that has its source in our vibrations. Writing is not even an equal part of language, and I want to talk about that, especially written language is not more correct or even somehow better or even the necessary aim of speech. That concept is so false and so counterproductive for us as a generation of teachers and researchers who now have the great results from neuroscience to help us break through and get some new methods and new kind of exercises. Because after all, the back of everything are our students, and they are the ones that we're here to serve. But we continue somehow to imagine that written speech is our sounding board or our source of judgment or source of correctness for pronunciation. And by pronunciation, I mean both speaking and listening. We describe speech sometimes as something that is not as good as the written word. It's not quite correct. It's slang or it's an accent, something like that. But my good friends and teachers, tutors, fellow teachers all around the world, we really need to break free from that idea. The notion that writing is the gold standard of language. We need to work into something more useful and exciting and definitely radically new. I'm not saying that we will not use the books and texts. Of course we will use all the wonderful resources we have. We have such great practitioners now who have become authors: Richard Caldwell, Judy Gilbert, Mark Hancock, a great list of others. And we will continue to use all those course books. But I'm suggesting that there are other kinds of exercises we need to put alongside our traditional approach. So the insights from research are what excite me, and if we had another 2 hours tonight, we could talk about them on and on. However, I'm just going to touch on them tonight. But just to finish with this idea that we have been using writing as if the written word was somehow equal, can I mention deleting and linking? You know, deleting and linking what? I don't delete my tongue or link my cheek or bone or anything. You know, my mouth doesn't think it's deleting or linking anything. It's producing a beautiful language that's exquisite in its complexity, and it's perfect. As long as it's intelligible, it's you know, the written language. Even I heard someone recently, someone in a church talking as if it was really the most correct way to speak. And you and I know that it's not only not the most correct way, but it's a disservice to the beauty of language. And even we talk about the four modalities. We teach reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Hello, reading and writing exist outside the body. They are not the source of language. They are codes. Of course, they're rich codes. They're wonderful. They gave us Shakespeare. They gave us literature. But they are a faint imitation of language. They are not language itself. So I just hope that one of the things you'll take away tonight is that language is physical. It's in the body. It is perfect. It is the source of every other kind of code. It's the source of writing. And of course, writing is wonderful for us, where we absolutely need it to send messages over distances or over time. But it has very little representation of many of the beauties and complexities of the written language. And that written language is correct. It's not wrong, it's correct, because it is the language. It is the source of all other language. Okay, that was my little spiel tonight. I'm sorry to have taken 10 minutes of your valuable time. Now I would like to share the information that has brought me to my present position on pronunciation, speaking, on language generally. And as I said in the first part, I'll talk about language, then about the brain, and then show you an approach that has come about because of my studies. The approach has been developed for my adult Asian students, and it's now time to start our slides. So just before we do that, I just want to mention two people in our field, very respected practitioners. Richard Caldwell is one. He has produced those two amazing books, which really must be, you know, obligatory reading, required reading for all teachers of ESOL. But he's put up on the 1st of May, he put one of 4 videos. His last contribution to our field, he's saying at the moment, and this is one of the slides on his video. He himself is saying we are using the wrong tools. Up at the top you'll see that little scribbly kind of thing. It's all muffled and mixed up. That is what he's used to present spoken language. So spoken language as it's varied and unpredictable. And underneath is the kind of image we sometimes give to our students, that spoken language is stable, regular and predictable, and it's not. So when they get into real life, they can't understand people. And we have to read the quite strong words underneath that he says the methods we use for the goals of clarity and intelligibility in pronunciation work are worse than useless for listening. So we can expect that second language learners will not be perfect. They don't have to be. They simply have to be intelligible. But when we're talking about listening, We want as close to 100% as they can get so that they can understand their environment. So Richard has produced 2 books. That's his own words on that video that has just gone up, but learners increasingly are telling us they are bamboozled when it comes to real life listening. I don't know if you have students who are sometimes frustrated or bamboozled, which means sort of confused and put on the spot. I don't know if your students are like that, but certainly mine were when I came back to New Zealand and met my students. Here are Richard's two books. I can't recommend them strongly enough. You probably already know them. And here's another real guru in our field. Well, he's a neuroscientist at New York University. He has his own laboratory there. He's absolutely amazing, David Purple. So Dr. David Purple, he and his best buddy, Greg Hickok, were conversing on the 12th of May online about the last 20 years of neuroscience and language. And 55 minutes in, I heard him say what I have felt and seen in our field, and that is that the field of linguistics has rich data to share, but we have this new field of neuroscience, and there is so much in both these fields, and generally speaking, they are not working together. So the linguists seem very reluctant to embrace what neuroscience has to offer. And David Purple himself said both neuroscientists and linguists are not doing a great job dealing with that. So the practical problem of working together and sharing insights. So I just leave you with that thought for your own self. Where do you sit in that? Have you encountered reluctance to look at brain networks and all the other data that's helpful to us? I certainly have. A potential paper I was going to give a few years ago in France was dismissed because it was that brain stuff. We've given up Dr. Spook a long time ago, and truly it's nothing to do with those kind of children's stories. So let's get in here. I do want to share the information that's brought me to this position. I had to look at language. I was a lazy linguist. I came back from 12 years in Europe. I spoke German, French, and Italian. I didn't try hard. Most of those languages just came to me, really. Of course, I had done 5 years Latin at secondary school, just the best for learning languages later. And my first degree was in French. My second degree was in psychology and psycholinguistics. But I came back from Europe and found really hard-working Asian students, adults who had immigrated to New Zealand. We taught them 20 hours a week, but they could not hear. It's nothing to do with accent. They could not hear the language. One day I met an Asian professor in the corridor outside my classroom, and I knew she had been on holiday to Queenstown, which is a lovely lake area in New Zealand. And I said to her, did you go to Queenstown in the weekend? And she said, yes. And I said, how was it? And she looked at me, and I said, how was it? And then I realized what had happened, of course, that she hadn't picked it up. Now, she was a professor of English in her home university, and I knew that this difficulty of my students repeats itself in many countries. So let's get a look on to, I also had to begin studying quite extensively in the science area, but with my teaching eyes. So my adult Asians couldn't hear fluent English. I don't know if any of your students are like that, but their children learnt quickly and well. So we all know that happens. But how could I give these adults the fluency in their second language that their children enjoyed? And I wanted to find out if there was anything I could do to open up those pathways, so the childhood pathways in the brain that are so incredibly accurate and quick, couldn't there be a way of kind of opening them or forcing them to open so that the adults, well, my first dream was the adults would be able to become fluent like that. They would be able to understand and converse. And I have to say, I didn't find a method to do that. But I did find some really interesting stuff and an approach that helps. So what is this language like that is so difficult for some adult learners? I looked and saw my students were not that great with rhythm and melody. And so I began to focus on that, and I began to, tell them, I called the hammer words and grammar words. So the hammer words were nouns, adjectives, main verbs, and the grammar words were all the rest of it, articles, prepositions, auxiliary verbs, da-di-da. Of course, you are laughing because most of you will know what I didn't know at the beginning, that hammer words and grammar words are already well described in linguistics as content words and function words. So I had to look at real live language. I tried at this point to kind of illustrate that difference in emphasis. So what did you have for dinner? However, I noticed quite quickly it has no melody in it. There's no emphasis. It's not much better than the written word, really. So you probably know that content words are nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and function words are all the little grammar bits that stick up and hold whatever kind of meaning words we put on them. So function words, of course, are automatic. The grammar in a language doesn't change. So here we go. What was it really like for my adult Asians? They heard things like this. So guess what? That was a weather report. That's part of a weather report. And it's not an unusual part. It's quite normal. It's a group of squashed words that are, strongly pulled together, and then the content words come in and are louder and longer. But these little squashed words are what gave my students the problem. So in a minute we'll have a look at what they are, but you can have a guess at what you think that is. Then it's going to turn to. And the next one, obviously, pamachada. So native speakers will, even out of context, native speakers will recognise them. But look at the next two. They don't occur always together, but that was my professor in the corridor. She couldn't understand, isn't it? Isn't it nice? Of course she could understand nice. Or it's not. So it's not. It's so important for them to understand. And even, grammar in the sense of, verb tenses might have been, should have been. They are also melodic. The melody holds those tenses together. Let's have a look at them. Then it's going to turn to showers. Then it's going to turn to showers. And for much of the country. So I'm laughing and you might be laughing, but actually that's what's happening in the real live language. So when I took these little bunches of words, I called them gleeps. And these gleeps are the source of teaching for me. They are the bunches that are difficult for my students. Here's a couple more. You might like to do 1, 2, 3. See if you can guess what Skinnaby's morning, Clark. Skinnaby's morning. You could try typing it. Gleeps is G-L-E-E-P-S. Thanks, Beata. How about number 2? This is great. Epilaceta. Or number 3, epilazenceta. So this is real language. This is good language. There's nothing wrong with that language. It doesn't need to be corrected. It's the ballet of sounds. It's the balance between meaning and grammar in English. It's going to be some morning cloud. Now, the reason that it's important is not just that they need to understand as much as possible, but that these little bunches, as much as any other part of the language, carry the identity and characteristics and nature of what this particular language, English, is. And that's important for us. How about this one? This is classic. If you've been teaching for a while, you probably know it. That's a nice sweater. Isn't it? Yes, it is. So that's from Small Talk. Wonderful book, Carolyn Graham, 1986, still going strong. So that I discovered that the language that was bothering my students and perhaps bothering yours, I don't know what groups of students you're teaching, but certainly adult Asians could not hear. I started to study, and just in brief, this is what I found. And I wish that I had known all of this at the beginning of my teacher training. The most important thing that I discovered, or one of the most important 2 or 3 things, was that language is processed by 2 separate networks in the brain. Now, the reason that that is processed, that is important, is that procedural memory, we are unaware of it. We don't know it's there. It's even physically hidden quite deeply in the brain, but procedural memory, which does all the work of learning our mother tongue, while we're not even knowing what it's doing. That was one of the 2 memory networks. The other network is the one I was well familiar. You will know it. When we teach to the declarative network, so the front brain and other parts. This network is what we learn with. It's what we consider ideas. We remember history. We remember our own life. We create literature. We create poetry. But it is, although it's possibly the network that sets us aside from animals, however, declarative memory compared to procedural memory is quite limited, because it does not have a little scanning device in it for scanning and processing sound. Procedural memory, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum in the brain, they scan all kinds of things. They scan the horizon when we are walking. Our procedural memory, or those networks, are scanning the weight on our shoulders, the light falling on our eyes, the ground we're walking over, all of the muscle movements of our whole body. It's amazing. It's a huge task. Also, even if you're in the city, those memory networks are finding the horizon all the time. So that's how we stand upright, that's how we walk and run. Are the same networks that we learn to ride a bike, learn to play the piano with. So any complicated procedure, even your key in a lock, if you get a new key, it doesn't fit very well. You jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. During the night, the procedural memory networks practice the difficult things of the day, whether they're a phone number or anything else. That is the network that has worked for my Asian adults' children. And that's the network I want and wanted to open up, to make it somehow process the sound, instead of trying to understand it with our head or with their head, but processing it. Okay. Now, I'm going to whip through this a little bit, but the very data that we actually use in procedural memory, I didn't know that I didn't know. You know what I mean? I didn't know I didn't know. The data from the acoustic signal in speech, we don't hear it. You will know it, I'm sure, because if you have ever seen something like that, a spectrogram, right? Spectrograms are the acoustic data in the speech signal, and they most certainly, we do not hear that. We don't hear all of those vibrations, the formants, all that kind of thing. I had met Mr. Ullman, and my story is a little bit about the Michaels, because Michael Ullman, two very important papers, 2001 and 2004, is the one who opened up, declared and explained those two memory networks. So procedural for skills and language as a skill, and declarative for facts. So first language speakers, and all of us, we use the implicit language processes. So that is procedural memory. The explicit conscious learning for language we use a little bit. We use it for reading and writing, but mostly when we're speaking or listening, we use the procedural memory. Implicit, I love implicit language, I like it. ILP, implicit linguistic processes. Adult second language speakers mostly make use of their brain, we would say, their front brain, and it's much slower. It's word by word learning. It's very explicit. We have to explain it. We have to learn and learn and learn again. We use that for learning grammar as adults. We use it for learning sounds, unfortunately, as adults. And a lot of our pronunciation is processed by that network. If second language speakers are a little bit more fluent, they will use implicit processes a little bit. So the more fluent they are, the better they can use a little bit. But I wanted for my adult learners a lot. I wanted them to be able to jump into English. Procedural memory, we can't hear it. It works without our knowing. It lifts up those vibrations, so it's implicit. It's automatic. You can't stop it and you can't start it. It's automatic for children. So let's have a look at that. Here's children learning several languages. So you'll see the procedural network for children simply creates a new database, learns the mother tongue, creates another one beside it, or another and another. During childhood, the procedural network is open and available. Some extra vocabulary and reading and writing children will use their front brain for. So there's two different networks there. So how about our dear adults? They have one sound system that has been developed and it's well established usually. And that one sound system is the only one they have because they are trying to use their conscious thinking brain to listen to and process sound. And they have to try and remember sounds. They don't take the sounds into their brain networks. They have to try and learn them. So the front brain, that declarative memory network, is what we might call the learning brain. That's where we normally do most of our conscious learning. So how does speech get taken up into that jolly old procedural memory? Ha-ha! What goes on in the brain? I mean, if we just open our mouth and out comes language, our first language, we don't give it a thought. So what is there under the bonnet? Like in a car, you open it up, you see the engine. You close it, you drive along the road, you don't know what's under the bonnet. So which language features are taken into procedural networks? Why can't we hear it? Why aren't we conscious of it? And how can we use that for adults? I came across my second Michael, Michel Paradis from Canada. And I once emailed him and asked him how to pronounce his name, whether you pronounce it Paradis in French or Paradise in English. And he said, whatever you like. But his book is well worth reading. Declarative and Procedural Determinants of Second Languages. It's expensive, so I hope your library has got it. What we do acquire from language are the vibrations and the wave bursts. We do not perceive them. They build up a beautiful database. They scan the acoustic data all the time. So the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, of course with the motor networks and the auditory cortex are involved, but they are scanning this new language, or scanning the first language if they're children, and they're picking up all the properties of that language. Just a wee example here. The vowel father, R as in father, and you might pronounce it differently in parts of England or Scotland. It has 3 peaks, you'll see. Those vibrations, that every sound makes a vibration. Well, the vowel here has 3 peaks, formants we call them. That's how the brain identifies that sound. So below it there's another vowel, heed, and you'll see that 3 top bits are at different places. And again down below, pool, you'll see an early peak and then quickly another one and way down the end. So these 3 points are like identity statistics for the brain. The brain thinks this is really easy every time. That's okay, that's that. Beside it you can see the throat and mouth and the marvellous way we can use our all our body for producing language. So actually I'm going to get a little bit technical here, but don't worry if you don't get it. The main thing is that there's this amazing system going on and it's doing stuff we know nothing about. but we need to understand it for pronunciation, for speaking, for listening, for the language. So, as I said, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, they scan and scan and scan when we're children. Takes about 4 years, doesn't it? And then, boing, the grammar and the sound system are taken up. So they scan the frequency of what all these items are. We don't know it's happening and we can't influence the process, and that's also true for second languages. However, remember, adults don't activate their procedural memory. We think perhaps because of the changes that the body the hormone changes during teenage years, but that's not established definitely. But something changes and that procedural memory closes down. Here it says, just because I love, this is a wonderful app, so I put it down the bottom. You can open and close the brain, it's wonderful. The blue part is the front brain, the frontal cortex, our thinking brain, and very much part of writing and reading, and the part that is trying hard for my adult Asians to learn to speak English and understand it. The little yellow bit, that's the motor cortex, but and underneath is the green temporal lobe. So there's a lot of language decisions happen in that temporal lobe. But let's look inside the brain. Ta-da! You take one side out, and that shows us the essence of procedural memory. So maybe you don't like it. I find it fascinating. The little blue thing in the middle with sort of spiky bits out, that's basal ganglia in there, and they connect to the little brown bundle at the bottom, which is the cerebellum. And notice that the auditory cortex, which is tiny, does wonderful work, is very close to both the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. There we are, another picture of the basal ganglia. I was so excited when I found the basal ganglia because they are the processor. That's what we want to really, push things along. I'm going to get a bit quick here. I hope that you can go and look at some bits of brain. That app is a great start. What has it got to do with pronunciation? The thing is, if adult brains have stopped using procedural memory, how can we start it again? And I have to confess, this was my long aim about 15 years ago when I started study. I wanted to force that network to open up because it's so good for children. There's several researchers at the bottom. You'll see McQuinney, Squire and Eulings and others suggest that the way to reactivate things is with repeated input. You probably already know this because if you damage your leg badly and then you have to learn to use it again, you do so by repeatedly exercising it in the way that it needs. So similarly, the neuroscientists are suggesting that a rich environment of repeated input may induce plasticity. So I'm going to have to skip through a bit here. But along with the rich environment of repeated input, the suggestion is that we will have to develop special strategies for reactivating, they say, re-inducing plasticity in those networks. But it's not just plasticity. We want, as language teachers, we want that network to open up and create a phonological database. Okay, I'm going to show you a 3-minute video of a class, one of my classes in action. Now, these classes had 20 hours a week, and they were allowed to stay in these classes for 2 or 3 years. They were adult learners, and they were all from Asian countries, so we don't have many permanent residents from France or so forth. This video is not scripted. I used to video every day. The students agreed I could do that, so more or less I set the camera up almost every day for 5 or 6 years. That's about 3 times a week or 4 times a week. I would do speech stream with them. Now you may find the system a little uncomfortable. It's not easy. It doesn't sit easily with adults. So you have to gain their trust, but they give you their trust. Very quickly, they will give you their trust when they see how quickly they can begin to hear what they couldn't hear before. So you will see in this video the first part of speech stream, which is repeating and repeating and repeating a particularly difficult, tiny half-second slice of language. So we will sit and watch television in the morning, the television presenters, and then I will stop it at any point really where I've heard something that's difficult. It has to be very difficult because it has to be repeated often and often without understanding. That's a little description. The little bit, the gleeps, as I said, and that's just a name I made up. It's a bunch of words that you can pull out of the speech stream and use to repeat again and again. That bunch of words is not being learnt by the procedural memory. That bunch of words is being scanned by the basal ganglia and cerebellum. Scanned so it finds out what is the nature, what are the characteristics of this language. So it must be incomprehensible, or the students' brains will revert to their first language system, and we have to block that. The only way you can block it is having no text and, as long as possible, no understanding. So I want to create an environment where the brain has a chance, where for 10 minutes, maybe 5, 10, maybe 12 minutes, they are repeating and the brain is saying, oh, what's that? What's that? I can hear its language. I don't know what it is. I've got to scan it. So that's what's happening. The brain is not actually, and I forget this myself, but the brain is not learning those words and remembering it, not at all. It's looking at these relationships between sound and how often they occur, and it is learning about the language. Okay, let's have a go with the video, please. Okay, really sorry for some people that it didn't work. Can you hear me now? Thank you everybody. I think you've got the main message I wanted to give you about the brain and about what I believe has to happen to activate this procedural process for adults. It may be not as important if the two languages are close, like Dutch and English, for instance, but certainly for some students around the world, the difficulty of hearing can be greatly helped. Students love speech stream even though it's really hard work because they get results with it. So after about 3 months, 2 or 3 times a week, an hour at a time, so in an hour maybe I will do 3 or 5 gleeps, no more. That's the students are exhausted then. So I'd like to open it up, see how you're feeling, see what you think about summer. If we have time for a little bit of talking, that would be great. Hi Maxine. My voice is now clear, but the video wasn't, Ahmed. So sorry. Marika, you've asked about word stress. When I teach speech stream, I don't break it down. I try to talk about the language as simply as possible. I don't want the students' attention during this exercise on thinking. I want them to be hearing and listening and reproducing. So the word stress, actually, speech stream is fantastic for really lifting their skills in prosody. They automatically begin to understand and use much better melody, much better emphasis and word stress. Okay. Beata, can you come in, please? Tell me about some time and how much time we've got for talking. Any questions?
We have time for questions, but about 10 minutes. But I understand you'd like to continue with a few slides more.
Alina, I don't understand the question between individual and typical live language. Do you mean accents, or what do you mean about that? No, I'm not on LinkedIn, Marika. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, but not LinkedIn. I have not tried SpeechStream, Fiona, by Zoom. You need, when I'm using SpeechStream, you really have to have their goodwill. They have to get into that exercise and really use their muscles, keep their mind for the first part of SpeechStream only. The second part of SpeechStream, we start to decode it. We take it apart. We guess the words. And in that part of SpeechStream, we no longer expect procedural uptake will occur. We're just using our thinking brain. We're taking it to bits. So that's the second half of the exercise. But the richness of SpeechStream is in those first 5 to 10 minutes that you can keep repeating and going from student to student, trying to encourage that reproduction. So it's reproduction without understanding. Absolutely no text and no thinking about the words. Beata, have you got some questions I might have missed?
There are some questions about the pronunciation software.
A lot of pronunciation. There are some pronunciation software is actually built on the concept that there are gaps between words, and that is a big problem. There's some wonderful stuff out there, but they're made not by language teachers, and I would really encourage language teachers to, I think it really should be 25% of our teacher training courses. We really need to get teachers into research.
Amanda?
The accent is not a problem, no.
Sorry, I was just going to read out Amanda's question. Amanda is asking, would a good starting point to be to look for common 2 or 3 clusters and look for recordings using them?
I can't hear that. Again,
would a good starting point be to look for common 2 and 3 clusters and look for recordings using them?
No. I think that we have plenty of activities, we have plenty of wonderful books that do that. Here's a cluster, here's this, here's that. In this process, we are just opening up the language and allowing the brain to do its job. I'm trying to create an environment where the brain has a chance to scan, and it scans much more complex things than this cluster or that. I think that we have to take just a difficult chunk that they can't understand, and use that. Don't worry what it is, because every little chunk will reflect the characteristics of the language as a whole.
Aliyah is saying that she thinks some deal with pronunciation of words. Sorry. She is wondering if you think it's the accent that they have a problem with. It's not that they can't hear the language, but they simply don't understand different accents.
I don't think so, no. Actually, sometimes second language speakers are less impeded by accent than some of my German students could understand Scottish better than I could. I think that those considerations are apart from this exercise. So every accent has all those kinds of squashing and linking things happening.
And Andy Kauser Ahmed is asking, what about colloquial sound patterns? Seem to be tough to non-native speakers.
You mean by fluent speech sound patterns, I presume? You mean if the non-native teacher is the one... The good thing about SpeechStream is that we take the material from, for instance, live television. You know, we only need seconds to... The presenters on live television are trained, they speak well, but they speak in normal conversation. I'm not quite sure if the word colloquial belongs with conversation. So I think that just let the language do its job and let the brain do its job, and then we don't have to worry about accents and colloquialisms and things like that.
And one more from Marieke. What if the students produce chunks their listeners cannot understand?
They will be practicing little chunks, these gleeps, that hopefully they can't understand. So while they are practicing, nobody is understanding, hopefully. I mean, of course, the native speaker can understand in the classroom. The thing is, this exercise gives them an ability to articulate better when they are speaking. So they don't need to reproduce these gleeps, or you called it bunches, I think, or something. They don't need to talk like this when they are speaking. The purpose of using this language is to create a phonological database in their brain so they can understand. The exercise also teaches them prosody, so melody and rhythm, and it does teach them, what did you say? Chunking. I can't read it, I'm sorry. And it does teach them to articulate. But the purpose of this exercise is not to teach them to talk like that. That is probably beyond them, and they don't need to. They can break down the language and speak with nice gaps or whatever they want. The goal of speaking is individual to each student. They want to choose how fluent they want to sound. They need only be intelligible. That's all. So although the listening exercise is very real live language as it's happening all the time, I would never expect the next day the student to come and talk to me like that. That's not the aim. The aim is to give the brain that chance to learn that sound system. And so they will be much better listeners. Unfortunately, it won't make them instantly fluent. And another thing, we cannot visit those next day. We never do homework. We don't come back because we've done our exercise, repeating, the brain is working, and then we move to talking about it. What are those words? What can we find? What can we hear? So that's the other brain comes into action, declarative. We know finally what it is. We know the writing, and gone is the opportunity for uptake to the procedural memory. Once they understand it, there's no use practicing it anymore, except for muscle exercise.
We missed one question from Adam. What types of problems do learners sometimes have with speech stream, and how do you overcome them?
I think that, as you can see, speech stream is quite embarrassing for adults, especially Asian adults, I think. So they do have to trust you, but they quickly find out that they can understand better. When I start teaching them, so stage 2 of speech stream, we take it to bits, and suddenly they understand in a way they have not understood before. So that encourages them. So I would say that is one difficulty. The other difficulty is normally adults like to understand. So it's quite a discipline for them to, they don't have to, you know, they are exercising, they're repeating and repeating, and they have to discipline themselves to not think about the words, but to focus on the sound, to reproduce that sound.
And we've got
So they would
got
be
two more questions. One from Janie. Do your students bring you bleeps you have encountered outside the classroom?
Sometimes, yes. They'll sometimes say, somebody said this to me yesterday, and I heard somebody say this, and I couldn't understand it. What is it? So, yes, occasionally that happens. Not that often, but sometimes.
And a question from Amanda. Can we link this to listening to song lyrics, which they can't understand?
I don't use song lyrics. I use small talk because that is not a song. The trouble with songs is the song itself imposes its own structure on the language. So it deforms the language somewhat. So it's great using songs to learn, but I don't think they are effective as speech stream. However, I often use side by side my Smolensky and somebody, and or small talk, for beginners especially. And it is a muscle exercise. Yeah, it really is a muscle exercise. So if you can convince them that it's a muscle exercise, that helps them to stop thinking about the meaning, because that is the discipline they need. But they tend to like speech stream because they can hear better afterwards.
We've got one more question from Jagdeep. What would be the best way to reduce mother tongue influence in foreign language pronunciation?
So the mother tongue influence comes when there is understanding. If you give students the text, they will activate their mother tongue sound system. They can't help it. The mother tongue sound system is not what we want. We want to shut up the mother tongue sound system. We want to block actually executive control if possible, and we want to leave. So that's why text or understanding will bring in the sound system of the mother tongue, and this is not helpful for speech stream.
Yeah,
I hope
no more questions here.
Great. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. My email is on the last slide. I'll just bring that through. My email's down the bottom. You're welcome to, and thank you for your thanks. Good to have everybody on board. I hope that your various lockdowns haven't been too trying for you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. This was a great webinar, and thank you to all the participants in this session. I am copy pasting the link to the certificate right now. If you click on it, the certificate will be available for the next hour to download. It's a generic certificate, so you need to download it and print it out and put your name on the printout. Please remember to visit our website and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and PronSIG. We're planning new webinars in June and July, and if you're not a member of PronSIG, become one. If you join IATEFL, choose PronSIG as your special interest group. But of course, our webinars are open to everyone all over the world. So just follow us on our website and social media, and you'll find out more information about that. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Sue. That was great.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye from New Zealand. Hope you're well.